So let me start the session. Thank you for the time to take to attend the aMS Southeast Asia 2021. It's good to have you guys for my session. Just to start with the session, there will be some quiz throughout the event. So please attend and then just try to get the gift from the sessions. So today's session is about the Teams meeting development. In this session, I would give you a brief idea about what are the options where you can customize your Teams meeting and a few of the choices and the best practices which you can follow to create a Teams meeting app. There are several apps which you can create from Teams development, but today focus is only on the Teams meeting apps especially. I will just go through the brief about it. Before we start, this is just about myself. I used to do more of SharePoint development using SPFx, and recently the SPFx 1.17 and the latest version started supporting Teams development as well. So I started my exploration into the SPFx Teams development. I'm kind of new to the Teams development using SPFx, but prior to that, I've been developing more solutions for SPFx in the SharePoint as well as Microsoft Graph API, especially for Microsoft Teams. I have my YouTube channel. Later at the end of the session, I would go through one of the SPFx code which I have deployed in my SharePoint, where you can completely take over the Microsoft Teams through Microsoft Graph API. There are several Graph APIs which you can control Microsoft Teams. The way you create channel, how do you do the bulk creation, automating certain elements of Microsoft Teams within the SPFx. So those kind of elements you can see using the Microsoft Graph. You can follow me on the Twitter as well as my blog. Primarily, I'm also a Microsoft MVP, and I focus more on SPFx development, especially for SharePoint, and now slowly moving into Microsoft Teams development. If you have any questions, we can go through at the end of the session, probably. Then I'll try to answer the questions. If I could not able to answer today, you can drop me a message in the Twitter. I can always come back to you to address whatever you are looking for. Okay, so today, a short agenda for the today discussion. I'm not going through a detailed development here. I'm just going to give you the full details about how do you start developing for Microsoft Teams and how do you customize it later. Once you do your custom application, then how do you make sure that it works well with your Microsoft Teams on the calendar. So just the three major topics on the agenda. First, about the meeting apps. What are the elements of the meeting apps you can cover? Second, about the prerequisites. What are the things which you need to develop an app and how do you develop an app in a simple way? And the third one is about the Teams development. So whether you use SPFx or hardcore development, which you are looking for. So regarding the Teams meeting apps, it is kind of another app which you create more likely the customizing the manifest, like the tab apps, personal apps, and several other Teams apps which you are creating. And this meeting apps primarily been covered in the whole life cycle of the meeting. So if you take a life cycle of a meeting which is happening in any of the meeting space, there would be three major cycle. One is about the pre-meeting, which means how do you schedule a meeting. So every meeting starts with the scheduling process. So you schedule a meeting that is called a pre-meeting, and you can set up few of the apps before even you start the meeting, like setting up a board. And if you are doing a kind of an agile meeting, you can set up what are the project plans to be discussed and the recent sprint and how does it go through. So some of the questionnaires you can prepare. There are several blogs about how to create kind of a questionnaire app which you can set up in the pre sessions. One of our MEPs also been discussing about how to create a questionnaire app which can read detail from the SharePoint list. So that is one of the app which I will share later, and then you can have a look at it. That is about more of asking questionnaires in the pre-meeting. The second life cycle is about in-meeting, which means that when you are in the meeting, then what are the other things you can do? So for example, when you are in a very long meeting, which happens for almost the whole session of the morning, then you can just suddenly pop up a question saying that you want to order for lunch now, which can be kind of a dialogue, which pops up in the middle of a meeting. Then you say that yes, and you have a choice to choose what is the lunch you want to order. And or if you are developing a kind of paid solution for Microsoft Teams apps, so if someone is in the middle of a meeting, you can pop up or bring up a dialog box saying that you have to pay to continue, or a reminder to the attendees that you'll have to make the payment and to proceed, or some important thing which you want to pop up. Then you can do it in meeting sessions. This in meeting, later I would discuss, it can be in a several form of in meeting. It doesn't have to be mandatorily the dialog box. It can be kind of a subtle box which can get the notification of a person, and they can just ignore it. They don't have to completely action on it, but they can just ignore and just see that. The post meeting most probably would be the survey. If you are doing a kind of a project planning meeting, then you can gather information from the attendees or the stakeholders, and later these results can be saved as a kind of a result or a chart or in a form of how you design the app. Then finally that can be captured as a view result in the post meeting. You can do any of the cleanup you want to do eventually when you have done some apps which gather some information on the pre-meeting. Then on the post meeting you can clean up and then export it or get the results from the post meeting as well. You can also try to get more information after the post meeting, which means that how does that meeting goes through, whether you are satisfied with the current meeting. If you are attending a training, then you can gather more information about the training content. So these are the three life cycles which the meeting can go through. And if you can see on the right side of the slide, there are several possibilities of the meeting extensibility you can do, like creating your custom meeting app, the first one. And you can even create a custom scene. For example, there's a very famous meeting scheme, which is the together mode. So if there are more than 20 plus attendees in your classes, then automatically those attendees will be like in a classroom, like a together mode. You can create your own together mode. There are tools available. It's just easier. You don't need to program it. You create a scene, you create objects for the seating. Then there are certain restrictions for the objects and the scenes. Then you just publish it into your meeting. Then it becomes like another scene customized for your corporate maybe. Then you can have it as a scene. The next one is about the notification, which I mentioned you. There is a special API which I go through later. It's a kind of a notify API, which gives you an idea about when someone is in the meeting, you send a notification. Then there are APIs which are available to get the meeting URI, meeting ID, participant ID, plus the meeting details, which is the tenant ID also. Using these three primary details, you can customize your app to get what is the role of the person who joined in, or the participants or the attendees joined in. Based on the role, you do some action on it. So you can get the role. And there is an option to show the dialogue, which I mentioned you. Then they get meeting events. So the events detail, you can get it through the meeting ID. There is a GUID for each meeting. So using that GUID from your JavaScript code, you can get more details about what is the time, which time zone it is. Based on the time zone, you can customize it. Then integrate your bot. So I have seen some of the Teams meeting, which has been more interactive, like a gaming session. And there are few apps. If you go into the Microsoft Teams even, there are several companies, they have published an app in the store. So basically what they are doing is that they keep the audience engaging using a game. So there will be several games going on in your Teams meeting. You can keep interacting using your message board. This message panel, we call it as a message panel. The message panel area is your space where you can customize to have your own responsive UI, and you can start developing your game experience, and it becomes more engaging. So you can even use Microsoft Teams as a kind of booth So I have seen one. I've been into one of the teams meeting where they have several booths, kind of a concept, and each sponsor or showcase vendor would eventually have their own kind of a cards. So going through that cards, you can interact with them. How much is your product, and what are the things you have? What is your site details? So those kind of information you can have it in a card. It will be in a message panel, and these message panel, it can also be a shared panel, meaning that you can share that panel with the attendees, and it can be more interactive, like a doodle kind of a game where people interact with each other, and it becomes more of engaging meeting than kind of a boring meeting which you have. So there are several possibilities of meeting customization you can think of, and it is all up to the customization you are doing. And the life cycle which I mentioned you. So these are the elements surrounding that meeting app extensibility, which you can see on the right side of the screen. Next is about meeting app concepts. So there is, as per I mentioned you about the meeting life cycle, there are concepts around the meeting apps as well. The first one is about the meeting life cycle, which I gone through. Second one is about the participants or the roles of the participants which you interact with. And third is about how the participants log into your teams. The meeting life cycle I briefly went through. Second one, the roles, organizer, presenter, and attendee. There are three primary roles. Organizer is the one who is going to organize a meeting. Presenter, it's again like me, I'm presenting something. Attendee, who is the one who is kind of attendee, it's self-explanatory. So as I mentioned you, there are several APIs available which you can find out what is the role. Then based on the role, you just get the detail. And if he is an attendee and not in your tenant, then you do you can show an active card which is relevant to him to gather the information. So depends on the role of an organizer, then certain panel you can make it to enable. So there is a scope, we call it as a scope for the app to be deployed. The third one is about the types in a meeting. It can be an in-tenant or a guest or a federated or anonymous user. In-tenant, they have a full rights to the meeting, which means that they are an AD, they are in the AD or in in-tenant. They can access all the resources of the meeting, like the files, channels, and the details. Guest, they will not directly be inside the AD, but they'll be a part of AD. They have access to minimal information of the resources and the channels, but they are still a guest. They don't belong to that tenant, but there are one level down in tenant. The third one is about anonymous or the federated, which means that they don't belong completely to the AD. They can just attend. They don't have access to any other resources. They just come, attend, see the detail, and go off. That's it. So according to these scenarios, you can customize your apps. So these are the meeting lifecycle view, which you can see here. There are pre-meeting, in-meeting, and post-meeting. So right now, if you see in the picture, I mean, it is kind of jumbled, I guess. So the pre-meeting is this one. So you should read from right to left. So pre-meeting is this one, where you schedule your poll. You can start creating a poll, as many questions you want, before the meeting starts. So if you see here, there is a join button, then you create any number of polls here. So once the meeting started, this is kind of in meeting. The center one is the in meeting. Then these polls, whatever the questions you create, it can be in the message channel in meeting. So that the participants can or the attendees can start answering the question. So once everything is done, this is the post meeting. So you get the full insight of what happened in the meeting. And you would see that result, how many have answered. So these are all there. This experience can be customized. So throughout these life cycle, you can customize, you create an app and you can customize these experiences. I have seen during these COVID timing in the corporate, especially in one of my corporate client, when I start having a meeting with them, they even try to get the COVID check-in. Okay. So once you enter into the office, then you have your registration, then the COVID check-in happens, they gather some information, and finally it tells you whether in that particular meeting, how many have been vaccinated, how many are not. So those kind of things you can completely develop using the Teams meeting on this Teams lifecycle, meeting lifecycle. And when you start developing these lifecycle meeting apps from the Teams, obviously you need a kind of a backend to store all these information. The storing information, it is not restricted to Teams or any other data which you want to store. So these data can be kind of customized, or meaning that most of the time people use the SharePoint list because it is just easy, and the Microsoft Graph API is there, or SPFx natively supports the connection to the SharePoint. So most of the time, the developer will make use of the SharePoint client as a data storage, and all the information which you gather can be stored into SharePoint. And it's a developer responsibility to create kind of a programming experience to read and write into the SharePoint list. Once it is written into SharePoint, they usually write details using the meeting ID, and everything, all the information about the meeting will be saved based on the meeting ID, which is a unique GUID, plus the participant or the participant ID and the tenant ID. So for the particular tenant, this is the participant and this is kind of meeting ID. For that, what are the information? So basically, it would be kind of a one-to-many relationship. If 10 people are answering to a particular meeting, then you design a table in the SharePoint list, then it becomes like a SQL kind of an approach. Apart from the SharePoint list, you can also store in a Azure API, which is the Azure functions, serverless Azure functions. Nowadays, the serverless functions are the trend. If you want to save it into your Azure storage or SQL, or you have your own cloud storage, they usually make use of the Azure function, deploy it as a serverless API. Then you just call the API with the meeting ID and the detail, send it to them, then it will be stored into your database. So there are several possibilities. You can develop your app and then store. It's up to you how you program it. And the SPFx is one of the way to start programming. So before we start creating any apps, there are some prerequisites. I have linked the URL which the Microsoft Docs link to that. So these are the URLs which you can go through later. Basically, there are steps to guide on how to develop an Teams app in general. And there are so many videos from Microsoft 365 community, which later I will share. You can do step-by-step approach on how do you do that. But I picked up only few of them, which is very keen or very particular about the team development, which I was going through and then start developing app on that. So among them is about basics on how do you do the Teams app development, not just the meeting app. It's about any app development in the Teams. And apart from using SPFx or from a custom coding, there are toolkit UI which helps you to design meeting extension. There is a separate toolkit UI. Maybe I'll just go through that. So this toolkit is more of an app which is deployed. They also have a desktop app. It behaves like more of a designing tool, which is an Adobe kind of a designing tool, but it is completely been traded to Microsoft Teams. Like for example, you want to completely change end-to-end meeting experience, the in layout of a meeting, the side message panel, the top message panel, the dialog box which it appears, everything you want to customize for a corporate look with your own team. Then you can start using this Team UI toolkit. And everything you just design on that. Once you finish the design, then you export it and then import it into Teams. They have the end-to-end steps. They have also a plan and then free kit as well. Let me go through that in a while. Okay, I'm just opening the link. Okay, so this is the one, Figma tool. Let me go through that. I've just slightly played around the tool. I'm not kind of a pro in it. I was just playing around with this tool just to see how the meeting and the themes can be customized. You can download both for, you can do it online or you can download for desktop as well. The website takes a while. I don't know, some of the UI scripts. Once it is loaded, you would see they already had a customized UI also. You can download and then just put it into your Microsoft Teams. Then you can start using it. So this is one of the tools which been proposed in the docs.microsoft.com, figma.com. So this is the tool which you can start using, customizing your, okay, that's been loaded. You can see here, let me connect. Okay. So it goes into their site, and then you can start creating your, you need to create a login. So once you create a login, then you would have your own design plugin, and then you can download from community. There are so many designs which you can go through. So you can play around with this tool, and without any programming, you can start using this tool for meeting as well. Go back to the slide. Okay. So that is about designing your meeting without much of the programming. Then there are several guidelines when you design a theme on your own. For example, if you want to customize completely your team's meeting experience right from the beginning, completely for your corporate, then there are certain guidelines which to be followed. It is not a mandatory kind of a guideline, but Microsoft has already been set up a basic guideline so that once you follow that, it becomes easy for you to customize it, or it would look much better in all the devices. Okay. Then these are the APIs, the most widely used API within your Microsoft Teams app. The one is the get user context. You would get the context of a particular user meeting. Then based on the context, you can start playing around with the meeting ID. So there are several APIs which I mentioned you. The get participant is the one which takes several of the ID. First is the meeting ID. If you see here, this is the meeting ID, participant ID, and the tenant ID. These three are the key to get your participant detail. Notification signal is the one which I mentioned to you. It's a dialog box or any actionable item which you want to show or non-actionable item you want to show while meeting is in progress. Then it uses to interact with the people using this conversation ID. And once you send the signal, then you can either get the response, actionable response, or just the ignore the response. Meeting details, obviously, you can get by the meeting ID. It will give you all the details about how many are the mandatory attendees, mandatory invitees, and then the optional plus the time zone, so those kind of details. Okay. So how do you specify or configure your meeting apps? Basically, if you take any apps from the Microsoft Teams to be developed, everything is by the JSON manifest. So the JSON manifest tells you how many of the apps you can have it in the Teams, and what is the scope of the app which it can do, and finally what is the context where this app can be launched. So basically these are all the things which configures into how the app will be shown in your meeting. If you take here for the app manifest, these are the primary JSON fields which you will be playing around. Configuration URL. So for example, if you're developing Teams app which to be deployed as in the marketplace with your own domain, then you will have a configurable URL. And the configuration scope is the one which I mentioned you on which scope inside the Teams these app will be deployed. And the context. So these are the available contexts. There are several other available contexts, but for the meeting apps to be interactive, most probably you would use the meeting details tab, meeting side panel, and the meeting stage. So these are the most probably options you would use. So during a meeting, you have a choice of manipulating meeting side panel, which is this, You can see in the image, this is the side panel, in-meeting dialogue, and the meeting stage. So this is the meeting stage. If you see here at the bottom, you can have a nicely built cards. So for example, if you are doing a sprint meeting, you can have a nicely having card which can link it to your Azure DevOps using your API, get the details from the DevOps, and then just show here only the important things to be discussed. This can be the stage, and this can be a shared meeting stage as well, which means that it is interactive between people. That's how some people will create a game, and then it becomes very interactive to the game. And the in-meeting dialogue is the one which will pop up every time when something goes on, then it will have a pop-up and you will have an action or the message to dismiss. So in this way, you can configure your app to have your details there. So for this is the main configuration. So you are on the group chat, and the scope of the application, the scope of this app's configuration is the group chat, and the contacts is the side panel and the meeting stage. So if you want to show the meeting stage, side panel is mandatory. So you cannot avoid this side panel. So these two configuration has to be there to set it as a meeting stage. Okay. So once you play around with the JSON and app manifest, you will eventually know more details about how do you configure these details. Okay. So these are some of the best practices which Microsoft has published in the docs.microsoft.com site. I picked up few of them, which is kind of noticeable to do before you start modifying your meeting apps, especially if you are developing an end-to-end meeting apps for your corporate thing, then you can start doing it. So first one is about the interaction. So interaction point, try to avoid so much of the interaction point, because during the meeting, people get distracted. So it is about how you have multiple panels on your stage or in your side panel. If you have too many panels and each one has its own distraction, then I don't know, maybe it depends on how you want to plan it. So avoid more number of panels. So similarly, avoid unnecessary elements, like you have too many of the label panel, which would eventually take up more of the resources. So you just have the panel which is more needed to avoid taking up more resources on the meeting while in the meeting. Avoid multiple surfaces. So all 3 points somewhat similar. Avoid more and more cluttered panels within your meetup. It might take up more resources. Also, it adds more distraction to the users. Layout wise, you always stick to one column dialog and the one column tab. Why? Because most of the time people will try to attend from the tablet or from a phone. So during that time, if you have too many of the columns, then it might fall down and there might be too many of the scrolling, and it looks, people might miss the information which you want to show. So always prefer to have one column dialog, then one column tab, then it becomes easy to accommodate in all the devices. Controls, this is kind of a general rule in all the Microsoft related Windows development kind of way. Any actionable item or the dialog box comes up, usually they will have OK cancel on the right side of the dialog. So left side of the dialog, usually people avoid adding a buttons unless they have options or settings which is on the far extreme left. Most of the time, OK cancel will be on the right side and cancel will be the default on the right side. So that if someone accidentally pop-ups the dialog, you can always just click on cancel. So OK, they have to mouse over and then specifically click OK, which makes them feel that you are so conscious that you are clicking OK. Okay, and also the escape and the cancel button. And scrolling point, when you add more and more surfaces into their message channel, try having it in the vertical scrolling rather than the horizontal scrolling, because most of the time when people attend from the tablet or from the mobile, usually people tend to scroll top to bottom rather than left to right. Left to right, people try to miss things on the right side, which will look more hiding. As per the themes, you can have your own themes of your own color and other stuff, but recommendation is that you play around more with the dark theme so that it is more of not irritating to the eyes. I mean, it is more of a UI thing. It's up to you how do you make design on your screen. If your corporate design is more of red, green, blue, depends on the screen, then prefer to be a dark theme and more of a response layout because it has to accommodate to all the devices. Don't just design for just the desktop. These days, meetings have been more common in the mobile on the go. So design more of a mobile, thinking mobile as also in the mind. So that is one of the things which they would try to convey you. Some of the limitations. So these limitations which I could see when they first published on the docs.microsoft.com. Not sure whether they still have these limitations, but check before that. One of the major limitations which I read about is that these meeting apps, you cannot add it when you set the meeting to be a channel. So if you create a meeting to in channel, then the app options is not available to external anonymous users, and you cannot add when there is a meeting in the progress. But certain things might not be the latest one. Please check always the latest option from the docs.microsoft.com. I just picked up this from the first release, so probably things might have improved or they might have updated few of these limitations. So next is about how do you develop it. If you are a kind of a developer, how do I customize it? Or how do I change the whole look and feel of the Teams meeting so that I add my own apps and capture more information while in the meeting. For that, there are prerequisite requirements, tools, and the additional things which you can do. First is about the prerequisites. This prerequisite is not just for the meeting apps. It is for any apps development using Microsoft Teams development. I've been using more of JavaScript and the TypeScript to configure it in the Visual Studio rather than Visual Studio 2019. My interaction was more of creating SharePoint SPFx. The Teams SPFx template is been out. I've been playing around. So soon I'll be deploying more content in my blogs and the YouTube video. Usually I try it out and then put it in my YouTube video. So I'm in the process of creating, playing around with this SPFx tool. And soon I will deploy some of my custom apps which are useful, which links with the SharePoint. I'm working on one of the apps which would link it to SharePoint, get the details and show it in the Teams. And finally, you would get all the details from the Microsoft list, the SharePoint list. And if you are a kind of a .NET developer, then you need to have Visual Studio 2019. If you are a React, TypeScript, Angular kind of a developer, you can always have Visual Studio Code. Later, I would just go through a simple creation of the Teams toolkit. Then you can start working on it. Node.js version 14 LTS. Make sure that you install it in the local machine. And the preferred browser, Edge or the Chrome for now. So you can use it for debugging. Additional tools for Chrome also you can install the debugging tool so that the remote debugging will be easier. Other tools, add-on tools which you can add is the Teams toolkit. Now it's now available and it's still in the preview. You can install it in the Visual Studio extensions. I'll go through that. I'm starting to explore on the Teams toolkit, so I'll just go through you on what is it and how do you do that. Additionally, if you want to interact with Teams resources, APIs, Microsoft Graph API is one of the best one to start with. You can start creating channels, you can interact with channels, you can interact with the chat and other stuff. So all these can be done in the Microsoft Graph. And certain things, if you want to have a hook and try to do more of controlling your meeting, then you look for those 3 APIs which I have shared you before. And the other option is that you should have a developer portal Teams to start with. I would prefer that because you don't want to play around anything on your existing tenant or your organizational tenant. Usually they will not give you access to deploy an app into your AD or as a part of AD to give access to all the apps within your organization or the tenant. So usually you just go to the developer portal, create your ID, and start having your own tenant to play around. So the developer portal is more of an office development portal, and this developer portal account is like will be expired in 3 months, or last time it was every 3 months, I guess. Now I'm not sure. So you create an account every 3 months, they will try to expire it for you. Either you create another account after 3 months, or if you have a solid reason, or if you are really playing around with the development, then you can request to the office development team. Then the team will try to extend it for you, and you can keep extending it after every 3 months if you are legally using it for development and then making use of it in the right way. So that is one of the things which I've been using it on my side. So I used to have it in my developer tenant, and I'm the tenant administrator, so I can play around most of the things on the tenant app. So that is the major thing which you can do if you have your own developer account. Okay, so let me open the Visual Studio Code. Okay, so right now, if you see here, there are the Teams extension will be available in the extensions here. If you search for the Teams toolkit, it is still under the preview. Yeah, I zoomed in case if you don't see. So if you search for the Teams toolkit, you can always get it from here, and you can install it, clicking on it. And Microsoft would recommend to install additional toolkit, additional extensions, which is for, like, in my case, I installed Azure. So I can deploy most of the things within the Azure in the Visual Studio Code itself. Like, as I mentioned to you, if you want to do something on Azure API, Azure functions, with the Teams meeting app consuming a data from the Azure or from SQL or whatever the REST API which you want to develop, you can interact with the Azure account right away from here. You don't need to do it from your other side. So once you install the extension, this will be the disable portion, or in the uninstall. You can later install or uninstall. Let me do the quick start. So if you go to the home of the Teams toolkit, you have a choice to create a new Teams app. You create a Teams new app. It gives you 3 options. One is the tabs UI, bot conversational UI, or the message extension. So the SharePoint development team or the SPFx team is working to add more and more extensions here. So you can give them the comment on M365 community. There is a separate Microsoft 365 community, a whole bunch of team looking for a feedback on how these can be interacted. So you can select this. And once you select it, you can specify what is the hosting type. In my case, it is SPFx, which means that SharePoint framework. And once you select the SharePoint framework, what is your development standard? If you select none, which is completely pure TypeScript, if you know React, then you can have your React as your base programming. For now, I'll just select React and then the hello world, and then you confirm it. So you need a description. You confirm it. Then I need to select a folder. So in my case, I select this and then download. I create a folder, test. Okay, just select this test and select a folder. Application name. What is the name of the application you want to develop, which is the Teams app. Okay. So once it is successful, what it does is it asks you for this folder whether you want to trust this folder, and I just trust. So once it is trusted, you see here there are several assets being created. We go to zoom in. Okay, if you just see here, these are the assets. If you are a kind of a SPFx developer before, everything is kind of a web part. So web part is the one which SPFx it started with. So apart from that, on top of this source, you would see the teams being added here, and you would see the details of the teams detail, and these are the app package, the manifest. Okay. So whatever the details you have given in while creating your app, everything is in the manifest. You can see the manifest here. Team development, hello world, short name, full name, and what is the picture of the icon you want to have. Later you can change your icon or the picture. Then what is the domain of where you want to deploy, and finally the web application info. So this is the one which will be deployed when you put it in the SharePoint. It will be displayed in your tenant level. If you want to deploy it at a tenant level, it can be deployed at the tenant level, then just propagate into your application. And if you want to see the properties, there are several properties which you want to see. Right, first. Let me check the package solution. So package solution is basically how do you package your application. So for each package, there will be an ID. Why? Because every time when you deploy your package, there will be a versioning maintained. You can go back previous and the current portion. So based on that, you can create your solution package and deploy it there. And the config is more of a web part config. Finally, I want to show you something which you want to. So if you are an SPFx developer, this should be much familiar. The package.json is more of a Node.js programmer, any Node.js programmer would do. And the tasks, check something which I want to show you. The launch sequence, yeah. So if you see, check the launch sequence as well. There is this configuration for the Chrome as well as for the Microsoft Edge. So basically what it does is, there will be a workbench URL, which is more of like a local simple server which is running in. It hooks up to that workbench URL. So anything which you interact in the web, it is automatically linked to your Visual Studio. So in that way, you can debug directly into your Visual Studio. Your code can directly come into your Visual Studio. You can start debugging into your application. So that's how the development works. Try it out, all this development. Probably they have, Microsoft has already have a sample. You go to this GitHub. You can see here. Control plus. Okay. So this is the place you need to head to if you are a Microsoft Teams apps developer. If you go to this GitHub, every information about the development is already there. So it has clearly mentioning about what are the team samples which are there, and the meeting apps development, the messaging extension, Graph API, scenario specific. So the scenario specific sample, you would see the meetings extensibility. So samples are here, and the side panel details. You can download this app and then try it out right away. And if you want to modify your code and then git repo and then take it and then you want to modify it, you can go ahead and then do that. You can also give a feedback to the team, M365 community team, for all the app which you have already there. You can see the meeting stage view. So all these app settings are already there. I mean the manifest. You will start downloading it and change, configure it, and then upload it in there. And all those steps are also already there. You can start using it, and any feedback you can just give it to them also. And finally, I want to show you one of the app which I have developed, which is this one. Just show you the UI alone. Okay. This completely uses the Microsoft Graph API. Show the last. Okay. So basically what it does is, I have several Graph API which can interact with the Microsoft Teams, And what it does is it gets all your Teams channel, and then it will directly post all your details into the Microsoft Teams as well. It can behave on behalf of your account and interacts with Microsoft Graph API to post it into Microsoft Teams. And this is about making use of the Graph API. I have several. You go to my videos and the playlist. I would have all my SPFx here, and you can. I have two of the samples which you can make use of it, and my GitHub as well. Finally, I want to show you one small thing. Let me open the other window. Yeah, here. So how do you create an app or add an app in the pre-meeting, post, and the other meeting? So basically, if you see here, I have already created one Teams meeting. So if you go to the meeting and expand the meeting, you can add an app here. So these are the apps which can be added before the Teams meeting has been starting. This is a pre-meeting app which you are adding. For now, what I have done is I have added a poll. If you can see here, this is the poll. Right now, I added only one poll, which I can submit. So whenever a meeting starts, what happens is that it posts a card into your meeting, and people can answer the poll. And later, once it is finished or the post meeting, you will see the result. So if I join this meeting, hopefully it doesn't break. Let me stop this. Hopefully there is no echo. Okay, you see here. So that's the in meeting option where you see the message panel. I can answer the question and submit the vote. So once I submit the vote, then these things will start to appear. So submit it. These things will start to appear.
Senthamil, 10 more minutes.
Okay, I'm finishing it almost. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so this is the meeting message panel and in-person meeting. So once I finish the meeting, then you would see the details of the post here. This is the post meeting. So all these details you can see here. It is the panel here. So basically, you can add the app while in the meeting, and you can start adding any number of apps in the pre-meeting. So the app which you deploy will appear here. Select the app, then it depends on how it goes through. So for now, this is a Forms sample, Microsoft Forms sample. All these details will be stored into the Microsoft Forms. So in your account. So it will be in your OneDrive Forms. It will automatically create a forms, and then you can get it from there. If you are connecting to Azure, then use your API. And if you are connecting to some other data store, then use that. So that's how the meeting apps can be configured. Finally, I just want to finish up with the thank you note and finally, I just want to finish with this one note saying that we have recently launched the Asian Cloud Community, where you can go through all the Southeast Asian region MEPs would be there, and the community leaders would be there. You can start interacting with them. This is just about the general community thing, where you get details about the all the technologies irrespective of Microsoft as well. There are just head to that site, and if you want to get few details on the community, you just ping us. Yeah, that's all from my side. Any questions or anything? So if there is no question, then probably we can wrap it up. Renee?
Hi, Senthamil.
Hey, hi.
Yeah, hi, Senthamil. This is Kirti. I have one question.
Yes.
Yeah, so how this is different from when we are creating this SPFx web part from the command prompt?
Basically, what they
one,
have,
right?
more or less, it's the same, but if you use the extension, what they have done is they made it more user friendly. Plus, they add one Teams manifest in there. That's it. Apart from that, it doesn't do. It is more or less the same. They want to give a new extension so that you can easily create it from the Visual Studio Code. Yeah.
Okay. And is it possible that this app can be added into SharePoint site?
Good question.
As a web part?
Good question. I have not tried. It doesn't appear there because it is once it is deployed, it appears as an app manifest inside the tenant. So you deploy it in SharePoint, but it is more of a Teams app due to the manifest. Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah. So I was just relating that when we create with the SPFx this command prompt, we have the capability that the web part can be added in SharePoint as well as the Teams as tab. So I was just thinking whether we can add that.
I didn't try to be frank. Probably I will try it out and then I'll let you know. I have not tried to be frank, yeah. But I have read an article that it becomes like a tab within your SharePoint. Yeah, within your SharePoint. Because if you start using SPFx, all your context is already there.
Yes.
And you can customize anything within that using React. So should be possible. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. It's really helpful to me. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Thanks, Kriti, as well.
All right. Thank you very much, Senthamil.